All right, well, I know there's going to be a few folks that'll be jumping in here. Again, I apologize for the little technical difficulty in the link. I'm not totally sure what was going on there. We'll check into that and figure out what's going on. So again, thanks for everybody who was able to make it. Again, this is the SNR Coffee and Conservation Hour. Really appreciate everybody's interest in this. So we'll go ahead and get started a while. I got the recording going. So we'll be able, at the conclusion of today's meeting, we'll have this sent over. We're actually going to have it stored on both our YouTube channel, UNL Extension YouTube channel, as well as the School Natural Resources website. We have it under speakers page. So it'll be on there. Give it a few days and we'll have it uploaded on there. So again, my name is Andrew Little. I'm an assistant professor of landscape and habitat management in the School of Natural Resources here at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. The SNR Coffee and Conservation Hour was really designed to help university faculty, staff, state, federal, NGO employees expand their knowledge and awareness of natural resource conservation efforts across Nebraska, as well as our neighboring states. The typical structure of this meeting is approximately about 15 to 20 minutes for the presenter, followed by 40 to 45 minutes for the discussion with all of you, the audience. So really hope you find this a beneficial meeting today. Really looking forward to the interactions that we have today and the discussion. There's a couple of reminders, as I mentioned earlier, about our YouTube channel. Last month's presentation by Dr. Larkin Powell was recorded and available there. Next month, we're going to have in February, Shelley Kelly, the Sandhills Task Force Program Director. Her presentation is titled Sandhills Conservation, Successful Landowner-Led Partnerships. Again, we also welcome your feedback after today's meeting. I'm actually going to put a little Google survey link in the chat. So please take a few minutes and at the conclusion of the day and go in there and fill that out. I really appreciate that feedback. So we'll go ahead and start this presentation today. So Melissa Mosier is our speaker today. Her presentation is titled Collaboration Along Riverscapes, the Platte River Initiative. Melissa worked in the Water Planning Division of the Nebraska Department of Natural Resources for the past 7 years, and for the Lower Platte South Natural Resource District and Lower Platte River Corridor Alliance prior to that. She has an MS degree from UNL in Natural Resource Sciences with a minor in Water Planning and Management and a specialization in Human Dimensions. As a new Platte River Program Director, Melissa will work to organize and expand conservation efforts across the Platte River watershed in Nebraska, Colorado, and Wyoming. Much of her work will center around engaging and strengthening existing partnerships with other conservation organizations and agencies working with the Platte River Basin, as well as seeking out new ones. Melissa is excited about the opportunity to work with so many others who are knowledgeable about and continue to improve the ecological sustainability of the Platte River watershed. So with that, Melissa, I will turn it over to you. And again, I'll kind of help field questions as we get to that point later on. So you can go ahead and share your screen a while.
All right. Thank you, Andrew. Let me make sure I'm showing my PowerPoint slides. Okay. Can you see a slide with a bunch of sandhill cranes on it? You can hear me okay, hopefully. So thank you, Andrew. Thanks everyone for coming. I hope that you're all done with your post shoveling, stretches, and you have a warm cup of coffee with you now. Like Andrew said, my name is Melissa Mosier, and I'm the Platte River Program Manager with Audubon, Nebraska. I started with them just back in August of 2020. So today I'm going to give you a little overview of what the Platte River Initiative is and what we hope it will be. And then at the end of this presentation, I have some questions for you. I'm hoping to get some input and some feedback on ecology conservation management along the Platte River that will help this initiative as it moves forward. But first, get my slides going. Okay, so first, just to give you some context. So the National Audubon Society's mission is to protect birds in the places that they need today and tomorrow. So in order to do that, we have a number of strategic priorities that we use to guide our work And we have one that's related to water resources. So the Platte River watershed offers us a couple of different, or a lot of opportunities to address the different goals in Audubon's water strategy. Of course, we have opportunities for on-the-ground conservation work, but we also have the Audubon network of staff, chapters, and partners that can really help us advance more balanced water decisions for the benefit of birds, habitat, and people. The Platte River watershed was designated by the Audubon Society as a national conservation priority. And so that's kind of where this initiative was born out of. But it's also important to remember that the initiative is going to be building upon a foundation of advocacy and conservation work in the Platte River that's been going on for well over 5 decades or so. The Rose Sanctuary, Audubon's Rose Sanctuary near Gibbon, has been a hub of that work. And there's been a lot of successes as far as protecting water, building durable public will for conservation work along the Platte River, and also building an economic model that supports and encourages conservation. So that there's a big focus on the central portion of the Platte River. That's where we have our annual sandhill crane migration stopover, and it is a critical habitat for endangered and threatened species. So there's a for good reason a lot of focus there. But in order to really start to build more resiliency along the river and long-term sustainability, it's important that we start expanding to a watershed approach. So we're going to be working across political boundaries and going into that North Platte River Basin and South Platte River Basin, and then the whole central and lower Platte portion of the river in Nebraska too. So the Platte River Initiative is going to be using an ecosystem approach to restoring the Platte River, and it's going to be multifaceted. But the foundation of the initiative is going to be building strategic partnerships. That's going to be how we organize and make sure that we're directing our resources to where they're needed the most within the watershed. We're also those partnerships are also going to help us leverage additional support and resources so that we can get closer to meeting our shared conservation goals. One really nice aspect of this initiative is that it's going to help us coordinate and prioritize our habitat and conservation work more, so we can make sure that our limited resources are being used most efficiently or effectively within the watershed. And that will also apply to our work in policy and education and outreach too. Audubon and our partners are going to continue to do the governance work that they've been doing for decades along the Platte River, and will continue to take a leadership role in advancing environmental interests along the Platte River. And so that will continue. And then we also really want to make sure that we're being intentional and inclusive about engaging communities that live within the riverscape. I think it's important that we make sure that we're making the connection between the river and the communities more clear. And that if there are communities that haven't been engaged in previous conservation efforts, that we're making sure to engage them here with this initiative as it moves forward. So like I said, there's a lot of conservation work already going on in the Platte River. So one example is the Platte River Recovery Implementation Program, or PRIP, which some of you might be familiar with. So that's been in place for decades, and Audubon and our conservation partners have been participating in that and in supporting that. And PRIP is really focused on that central portion of the Platte River, that critical habitat reach, and compliance with the Endangered Species Act. But there still needs to be conservation and collaboration work that goes beyond compliance with the Endangered Species Act. So this group called VESPR was formed in 2019, and VESPR stands for Vision for an Ecologically Sound Platte River. And it was designed, this group is designed to work in parallel with PRIP and other conservation efforts along the Platte River. but also to expand and enhance conservation work. So we're going to be using, the Vesper members are all committed to using a collaborative ecosystem approach to water management and trying to advance balanced water use decisions, and so we can balance those different demands along the river. And the scope is really going to be a lot more broad in terms of both the geography and the time frame. So the Vesper group has been working on developing this long-term 50-year vision for the Platte River, and they're using 4 guiding principles to do that. So the first is that collaborative ecosystem management approach, and then also focusing on a diversity of wildlife needs as well as overall ecosystem functionality. Recognizing the importance of balancing water needs, not just for wildlife, but for humans as well. And then the part that I think is really exciting is that it's focused on building social and ecological resilience throughout the riverscape. So these are our current partners. We're working with the Nebraska Game and Parks Commission, Playa Lakes Joint Venture, Ducks Unlimited, the University of Nebraska School of Natural Resources, the Nature Conservancy, Audubon Accords, the Crane Trust, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And we are also, the Prairie Plains Resource Institute also has joined recently as well. So we have a lot of great partners that are, really helping to move things forward. And we expect and hope that we'll have, a lot of great future partners as well. So as we move this initiative across the watershed, it's going to be important for us to make sure that we're being strategic about how we engage future partners. And there's a lot out there. So that's related to why I'm here today as well. So the research component of the Platte River Initiative is really important, and it's really important to the Vesper members as well. The Vesper group, when they first got together before I joined, they put together this matrix of desired future ecological conditions, that are really important in order to move us toward a more resilient and sustainable watershed. Along with those future conditions that they hope to see, they listed the drivers and the influences that are either helping us get closer to our goals or further away. And so in that whole process, they came up with some either gaps in knowledge or research. It's not necessarily that it doesn't exist, but maybe we're just not aware of some research and data, or maybe it's not compiled in a way that is immediately useful. So, as the Platte River Initiative moves forward, it's going to be really important that we are able to collect research and data, that we're able to assess it and determine, where we agree and where we still have questions. And then also, we want to be able to use that data in our planning and implementation. So in the next few slides, I've taken those research questions that the Vesper group came up with and just summarized them and grouped them into themes. So I'll show you that and see, if there's any interest or expertise that you have to provide. But just so you know, I also have a more detailed list of these questions and all the sub-questions that go underneath them. So if you do have an interest, just let me know and I'd be happy to share that with you. So this first set of questions has to do with developing a better understanding of the hydrology and the ecology of the watershed. So one example is taking a look at climate change and the best current research we have on the impacts of climate change on available water supply, both in time and amount. Taking a closer look at the hydrology of the Platte River and the connection between ecological function. Obviously, those are really tightly connected, but we need to nail down a little bit more specifics on the flow regime of the Platte River, changes to the flow regime, and how that has impacted habitat along and adjacent to the river. I think a fun one would be looking into the sediment dynamics within the river, taking a look at the human, caused changes to how sediment works in the river, where we now have sediment building up in some areas, and we have other areas where the river is kind of hungry for sediment, and taking a look at what means we might have to address those issues. This next set of questions I really like because it's going to help us the answer would help us focus what type of conservation work we need to do and where, based on the impact that it would have on human communities as well. I think that's really important that we're including the human aspect or human dimensions in the riverscape. So the first is we have, a series of questions related to environmental justice within the watershed. And just a few examples would be, what communities are currently experiencing negative impacts from the Platte River or associated wildlife? What communities don't have safe and easy access to the Platte River? Let's see, how are communities being impacted by either too much or too little water? So questions kind of along that line. And then I think we also have a lot of opportunities to include like a spatial component to this as well. So being able to map and identify where we need to be focusing our restoration, protection, and acquisition activities is really important. So an example there might be creating a vulnerability map of the wetlands and trying to figure out where we need to focus our work on wetlands, or taking a look at where habitat is at most immediate threat to potential development. So things like that I think you can include, a human aspect, environmental aspect, and then a spatial component too. And this last set of questions has to do with determining, well, it has a human dimensions component too, as it relates to management and conservation policy throughout the watershed and how it varies. So this goes back to that working across political boundaries aspect of the initiative. First of all, it'd just be really good to have an understanding of where there's public support for conservation work and where that's lacking, so that we can start focusing our education and outreach efforts and then building trust throughout the watershed. We also want to take a look at the policy infrastructure that's in place within the 3 states that share the watershed as far as protecting stream flow. So those conservation or environmental water rights, and how that varies across the watershed and across boundaries. Same thing goes for, other water use regulations like groundwater use. And then also taking a look at water quality impacts, where are there opportunities for us to maybe influence or assist in some policy development, or where do policies already exist that we could be using to help communities facing contamination issues. And then just a few more questions along that same theme. As far as floodplain development, again, how does that vary? How do regulations vary across the watershed? And how can we find ways to use that to our advantage? And just what are people's perceptions of flooding throughout the watershed too, I think would be interesting. And then there's a number of dams already on the Platte River, mostly, in the upper portions of the watershed. So taking a look at, what methods are available now to help mitigate the impact, the negative ecological impacts of some of those structures. And then where, there's projects that are still being proposed, like in the South Platte River Basin in Colorado, we need a better understanding of, what the potential benefits of those projects might be and what the potential negative impacts might be. So gathering information on that as well. So those are all the questions that I have, summarized here. But again, if you have any interest in any of this work, I'd love to hear about it, and hopefully set up some ways that we could collaborate. I know that you guys have a lot of expertise, and you're probably the perfect group to be presenting these questions to. So if you have any comments or questions on them now, I'd be happy to take that. But my information is here too, if you'd like to get in touch later on as well.
Perfect. Thanks, Melissa. This is a great presentation. So yeah, we'll open it up. Feel free just to go ahead and turn off your the mute button, and you can get on there and mention your questions. We can kind of have an open dialogue. I really want this to kind of be more like you're just an opportunity just to kind of chat like you're chatting with friends at a coffee shop per se. So
Andrew, this is Francisco. Is this the right way? Do I proceed with the question?
Yep, proceed. Yeah, we'll make it, it's maybe a little atypical in the sense of the typical your typical Zoom meeting. So we'll kind of make this more a little conversational, I guess, put it that way.
All right, fantastic. Thank you, Melissa. Very nice presentation. And I like the idea of integrating all the different elements of this socioecological system from the societal, physical, biological perspectives. Perhaps the question I have is when you refer to data and the collection of data, as well as the use of data, either to, from my perspective, model the data to enhance what we have available or to predict what is going to happen. So I wonder if you could expand a little bit on your concept of data collection and how, let's say, ambitious or aggressive might be this data collection. Is it planning to go all over the Platte River Basin, which includes also the other states that you listed? And what is your view about the future, right? I do see that you make comments about what is the current status of the Platte based on new data or all the understandings or knowledge. Is there any element besides the climate change scenarios that brings us to a less, let's say, futuristic lead time, let's say in the terms of forecast or terms of a semi subseasonal to seasonal predictability?
Sure. Okay, yeah. So as far as your first question about being able to access the data and use it and kind of the scope of that, yeah, the Platte River watershed is really big. So that's an obstacle. But I think that it's still, it is one watershed, so it's really important to view it as a watershed. So we've been working on something kind of related to your question where, we would like to be able to have, a better understanding of the perceptions and values and motivations of the people that live and work within the watershed. So we're trying to come up with ways to put together like a public opinion survey. Of course, we would love to, ask everyone in the watershed their opinion, but that's just not feasible. So it's kind of, our responsibility then to find people that can help us find different research methods that can pick up, a representative portion of the people there. And I think that you could do the same, you can do that with the human dimensions or a social aspect. But I think, if you have the right expertise, you can also do that with more of the physical or biological and ecological aspects of the watershed. Because yeah, it would be, incredibly, or if not impossible to, go ahead and be modeling the whole entire watershed. That's obviously difficult. Then as far as, the future goes for the basin, yeah, of course, there are, we do expect changes due to changing climate. But I think there's also going to be some, interactions within the watershed that we do have at least some control over. There's going to be changes in patterns of human water use. There's going to be changes in regulations over water use. I'm thinking kind of, the different work that's going on in the South Platte River Basin and how that can really impact, the functioning of the entire watershed. So it's important to, that we're taking this watershed perspective and giving those decision makers that information as well. And then with other, in other similar, kind of human caused regulations like that, like what the Platte River Recovery Implementation Program, how they decide to manage or release water is also something that we have some control over, and we maybe could be able to project a little bit about as well.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Melissa.
Thanks.
Yeah, Bob Kozolka. Could you expand a little upon why you think your program is necessary when there is the Platte River implementation program?
Yeah, sure. The Platte River Recovery Implementation Program, I think, is is, it's necessary, and we support it, and all of our partners that we're working with support it too, and we'll continue to, because we participate on it. It's just an issue of, you know, conserving and doing habitat work and doing water management work for the benefit of environmental species is always going to be something that's really necessary and is a priority. But as far as getting to a point where we can start to see more resiliency along the Platte River and kind of restore some ecological functionality, it's important to move just beyond those more limited habitat and compliance issues. So I think the scope is what our Vesper partners are excited about, being able to actually say that we want to take a long-term vision and we want to take a wider geographic vision, and really think about how the entire watershed works as a system, and how we can just, how our conservation work can just give the river, what it needs a little bit more in order to be more resilient. So it's just it's a difference in scope.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Melissa, this is Becky Sherman. Long time no see. Wondering how much do you think like private wells and private on-site wastewater systems and such play into kind of the puzzle that you're dealing with along the Platte?
I'll go ahead and tell you that I don't have a good answer for that at the moment. I know those are both issues along the Platte River that have come up in that matrix that I was telling you about, that the Vesper group has put together as, a question of, what are those impacts? So I don't have a good answer for you right now, but I would say that, it's something that is, they're both something that are on our frame.
Gotcha. I'd be interested in talking with you more about that.
Yeah,
Another
totally.
time. So
okay.
cool.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'd be really interested. And that's exactly kind of what we need is, it's just impossible for us to know everything. So being able to connect with you and your knowledge and your expertise would be great.
Yeah, I'm trying to come up, kind of revive an educational program for private homeowners and acreage and so forth, acreages and so forth that do have their own wells and on-site, and what they really do need to be doing to maintain those and keep them up and so forth, and the water testing that needs to be done just for water that's consumed. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Becky.
yeah, thank you.
Hi, Melissa. I'm Tatiana. I'm over at Nebraska Department of Environment and Energy, and great presentation. Thank you for that. I just kind of have a really general question. When you're thinking about the Platte River Basin, across political boundaries, who are the folks that you have in mind, at least at the forefront, or maybe have reached out to in Wyoming and Colorado when you kind of think pie in the sky about this whole vision?
Right. Well, the first step there is we have, the Audubon Rockies. So they have a lot of connections already in those areas. So they kind of know who the people are, who the main stakeholders are in those areas. So we've started out with our conversations with them. And they've been able to give me some leads on who to talk to as far as, the South Platte River Basin in Colorado and the North Platte in Wyoming. If it weren't for, our current, life, I'd be, traveling out to Colorado and Wyoming by now as well. So what I've been doing is attending the Colorado's roundtable meetings. So each basin in Colorado has these roundtables, which is made up of a lot of different stakeholders, and they talk about what's going on in their basin. And they're all working on redoing their basin implementation plans. So I've been able to connect with them and be able to attend those meetings virtually. which has been really helpful for me to get a better understanding of what's going on in that basin. It's a lot just to kind of to have a full understanding of what's going on in all 3 states. But yeah, and I think that we have opportunities too, as far as some connections that we have to researchers in Colorado and Wyoming too. And so I think, it's going to be kind of taking the expert people that we know and then asking them, who's the expert that you know? And then who's the expert that you know? And then and kind of moving around like that, I think is really helpful.
Gotcha.
Melissa, is
Andrew,
there, I'm gonna, oh, go ahead, Mike. Mike, go ahead. All right. Melissa, I was
well,
gonna
this is sorry, Andrew. This is Francisco.
Go ahead,
again.
Francisco. Go ahead.
Melissa, just a quick question. When you talk about collaborations and the interest of the different communities within the university and outside of the university, as we see here, what is the time window that you are thinking about, and what is how we can see or land this collaboration? How do you see this collaboration will take place?
It is kind of, well, what's going on right now is basically occurring organically. So when the Vesper group got together and they put their future desired ecological conditions and how we might be able to get there, when they put that down, they were able to kind of prioritize certain projects or issues that they wanted to work on first. And so we're kind of taking it as it comes, as far as, who has the resources right now, or maybe does a resource just come out of the thin air, and so now we're working on this priority as well. Like part of the nice thing about this initiative is that it's pretty informal, which gives us some flexibility to take opportunities when they come. So the time frame is flexible, is what I would say.
Sounds great. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Andrew.
Oh yeah, no problem. So Melissa, I was just kind of curious. I do a lot of my research is thinking, big picture landscape level. So I'm thinking from the side of like producers and working with them and working with other landowners. What has been your experiences and kind of how we can be more effective in communicating on managing the landscape to mitigate impacts on our streams. And my dad previously, he was a water quality specialist in Pennsylvania for the Department of Environmental Protection, and he dealt a lot with runoff into streams and creeks and such. And so I'm just kind of thinking about, from your perspective, have you had personal experiences you can kind of draw on that, things you've been able to leverage in working with landowners to help strengthen the riverscape per se by collaborating with various folks that are not just agency related.
Mm-hmm. I say there might be, some of the Vesper members have worked on that a lot more than I have. But I would say from kind of, conceptual point of view, I think, this human dimensions research that we're hoping to do first, that kind of came out as one of the top things that we need to do is to understand motivations, perceptions, and values of people in the watershed. I think that's going to help us give us a foundation. And then I think that, then what we could do is use the people resources we have that have good connections, that have good relationships with landowners, kind of help them, or they could help us kind of lead into how to start building trust and working with landowners and use, their on the ground knowledge of working with landowners, I think will be important. So using those resources, kind of building up our foundation of understanding of what's going on in the watershed, but then also using the people that already have trust to lead us into those relationships.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Melissa, this is Becky, and I'm just curious, do you have some kind of metrics that you're using to measure success as you're going through, and or if there's certain tests that you're using to measure the water quality, I don't know, improvements as you're going along?
Right. Um, as of right now, we don't have any qualitative measurements that I'm using, at least. I think the other members of this initiative have more of that qualitative research side of them, and so they would probably have a different answer. Since have my background in human dimensions, my priority with this initiative is really figuring out if we can build those partnerships where people feel like they're getting some of the work that they always wanted to get done. And I feel like that's part of the success, and if we're able to build those relationships and get people that have been working along the river for decades, and they know what the problems are, and they're frustrated because they come up with obstacles. If I can get some traction by pairing them up with someone else, I feel like that's success for this initiative. And then but it won't, it will come up as those become priorities. So it's not necessarily like, maybe water quality in this area might be a priority, but we don't have the resources there, but we do somewhere else. It's going to kind of depend on what we have, what we're set up to be able to do at the time. And again, so that's kind of the thing where it's, it's flexible, so that it might not be able to be measured as easily, quantitatively, but maybe qualitatively.
Melissa, this is Michelle Cook. Can I add something to that?
Yeah, please.
For those of you who don't know me, I'm Michelle Cook. I work at the Nebraska Game and Parks Commission, and I'm part of this VESPR team. And regarding, the question about the metrics, in our landscape design process, we did identify, certain maybe widths of the river or flows, or, amounts of sediment, or, things like that, ultimately that an ecosystem needs in order to function. So some of our goals and desired conditions are based on, numbers, and that's based on literature and research that's been done in the past, as far as, what species might need, or, the type of hydrologic connections that are needed, between wet meadows and the river and things like that. So there is there is a metric component to it.
Yeah, thanks for adding that, Michelle.
Melissa, this is Mike Forsberg with Platte Basin Time Lapse. Who's the audience here for this? At the end of the day, I mean, this is a long game initiative with lots of different components, lots of different streams of information and research and study and conversations. Who's the core audience for this, coming from your perspective?
Well, coming from my perspective, I would say my core audience is the conservation partners. And then I think going back to, Andrew's question, there are going to be multiple audiences depending on what we're working on. So it will be, up to us to be able to organize and make sure that we have, the people who are most trusted and have the best information and are able to communicate that information the best, have them out front when we need them to be working with certain audiences. From my role, though, I would say that my audience would be the conservation partners that will be engaging on this.
Can I have a follow-up?
Yeah.
Then how do you measure success then in this? How do you know that you've reached the audience that you're trying to reach?
I think it will be different for each of the different members of the VESPR group or the Platte River Initiative. Like I was saying, I think that how I'll determine my success will be, are we being able to get our conservation partners moving towards their goals? I think that would be successful. But I think as far as each conservation partner or each research partner, whatever they've come into this initiative with as their goals, those will be, success will be defined a little bit more to them. I see myself as kind of bridging people so that people can get what they're wanting out of conservation work along the Platte.
Thank you.
Hi, I'll hop in. Hi, Melissa. My name is Tanya Haig. I work with the National Drought Mitigation Center in the School of Natural Resources. And one of the things that came to mind as you were describing the project was some of the work that we've done with partners specifically related to drought, obviously, along the Platte River system, using some engagement strategies like games or tournaments, water management, that bring together a lot of different sectors, think about their overall goals and sort of strategies, how they would meet those goals during different stages of drought, since we're focused on drought. And I'm wondering if some strategies like that might be helpful for the kinds of things you're describing as far as trying to identify vulnerable communities and thinking about water access and kind of bringing a lot of different sectors to the table. And that's something that if there's interest, I'd be happy to follow up with. I know we have some engagement specialists who've worked in the Platte doing some of these tournaments that they could share with you, but also who just have a lot of experience on helping to think through some engagement strategies like that.
Yeah, I would. I think that'd be great. Thank you.
Melissa, what questions I'm thinking of from your presentation do you have for the group that we may the folks may want to chime in on?
Do you want me to go ahead and share those again?
Yeah, if you don't mind, that'd be great.
So let's go up here. I'll just start at the top. So here's the first set of questions having to do with more of that hydrology and ecology interaction. And then kind of putting in that social, the human dimensions part, and kind of the spatial part too. And then policy, issues related to policy.
If I can just chime in, this is Crystal Stoner. I'm with Audubon, Nebraska. And so while we're reading over the different questions that are presented here, I just wanted to take a moment and thank everybody for being on this call and for your thoughtful consideration of these different questions. Just because when we talk about ecosystem restoration, it is multifaceted. And as Melissa mentioned, there's multi audiences involved in this. And so we are actively seeking partnerships to help us address some of these questions. So just wanted to take a moment to say I really appreciate this moment in time and any of your questions and enthusiasm for what we have posted here.
Hey, Melissa, this is Becky again.
Mm-hmm.
One of I think the previous slide talked about identifying where some conservation, where there's a will and interested parties for conservation in that project area. So the Colorado Conservation Tillage Association hosts an annual conference in Colorado every year. I'm their previous coordinator before we moved out of Colorado, and they have a large producer group. They're in eastern Colorado, western Nebraska, southeastern Wyoming, and they've been doing conservation conferences for I think 30 years now, almost 30 years. And they have anywhere from 300 to 500 people show up at that conference every year. So that might be a good connection to find those conservation minded folks in those watershed areas.
Okay, yes, thank you. That's really great to know.
Hi, this is Crystal Powers from the Nebraska Water Center. Apologies for my bandwidth. I'll have to leave my camera off, but on the water quality side, we've for about a year now been gathering a really large set of folks from all the different sectors around nitrate issues, which a lot of the conservation practices that work well for nitrates also address several other water quality impacts. I think a few of the people on the call here might already be involved with that, but we would be very glad. We're in kind of the working group phase where we're talking about proposing collaborative projects around that, and we'd be glad to talk more and work with you guys as well, because we're kind of in the same boat of we're not trying to recreate the wheel. We're trying to find ways to collaborate and work well together. So I'm glad to share more of that about that project.
Yeah, that sounds perfect.
And that's a statewide across Nebraska project.
All right, yeah, thank you, Crystal.
Yeah, and I appreciate both Crystals mentioning that, because that's really part of this when I envisioned developing this webinar series, is really to help, like I said before, make these connections with folks, because I think sometimes we don't know that certain individuals are working in certain areas because we kind of are in our own little bubble per se of our work folks. And so it's good to actually find other folks that are out there working in this effort across the state and as well as the region as a whole. So appreciate those comments.
Carmen Thompson with the National Park Service, and I serve on the Nebraska Invasive Species Council. And Allison Zock with the University of Nebraska-Lincoln is part of that group. And so I would just recommend that you guys get connected with the council. There are a lot of restoration projects that the council is either involved in or several members of the council are involved in. So that would play into, the ecological restoration piece that you're looking at. It's also going to factor into, groundwater, particularly with Phragmites and purple loosestrife and Russian olive that tend to be along the Platte River, and those are all invasives. So just another connection for you guys to think about in terms of another partnership opportunity.
Thank you.
Melissa, I see Ted Hibbler has a comment or a question. Have you worked with Nebraska tribes in your efforts?
So far we haven't. We're just starting to get a better understanding of which communities we need to be intentionally engaging with. So within the watershed, there is not a lot of or any reservations, but there are communities that we need to be engaging with. So that's on our radar, and we're collecting. What we're doing right now is collecting information on different organizations that are have kind of a standing throughout the watershed that will help give us kind of the inroads to those communities. So if there is anyone that we should be contacting, then I would love to hear more about it.
Ted, did you want to add anything to that, or is that good?
Oh, Melissa, my name is Ted Hibbler, and I'm the tribal extension educator for UNL. And I work extensively with the tribal communities here in Nebraska. And I was just curious, I'm fairly new. I was just curious if your organization had any communication or if you've worked with the tribal communities at all in your efforts.
Yeah, we haven't so far because we're just starting to get into, planning to start getting into communities. But if you wouldn't mind, I'd be happy to talk to you about how we could better, focus our attention so we can make sure that we have tribal communities included in our work.
Okay, I can give you my email address in the chat room. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
What other questions do folks have as we're coming up on the hour here? Do folks have any more questions for Melissa or vice versa?
This is Laurel Badura, and I work for the Fish and Wildlife Service. And I don't know that this thought is fully organized, but to me, the most curious thing of any kind of work that we do is how we tie agricultural landowners to the river itself. And thinking about the impact of climate change on watersheds and how producers feel about climate change itself. And I think there was a study done by UNL that I seem to recall some 70% of landowners think that climate change is real and has an impact. But I'm wondering if there's a way to be able to tie the information you find out about the best current science on climate change with their yearly yields and their inputs and how it's impacting the ag community. Are they treating things with herbicide more? Are they have they seen increases or decreases in bushels? Are they something like that? It's just a thought because I'm trying to figure out how this is all going to tie into a producer and whether or not he sees any value in restoration in the long term.
Right. Yeah. Kind of making those kind of a spiral of impacts more clear, but also making it more clear how some of these conservation efforts could provide some, I don't know, like a bumper or some resilience for their operations.
Yeah, essentially.
Yeah, I think I get kind of, where you're going, and I think it's interesting too to try to make that to make these issues important to people takes a lot of, I think, better communication skills than maybe I had, but maybe hopefully that we can start to develop as a group, as we move forward. But because I think it's really important that we're getting that information out and making it real to people.
Yeah, I think that one thing that we always try and do in our projects is make that close tie to their bottom dollar, because our conservation programs were never meant to compete with production from an economic standpoint. So what is their final driver and what puts them over to the edge to think about conservation?
Right. Yeah. I like the way you put it there.
Well, I guess we'll go ahead and wrap things up with that today. I appreciate Laura's comment. That's a really good thought, because I do think in some of my work with precision conservation, finding ways that we can help producers with their bottom dollar, bottom line for them is that financial component, and that's a pretty significant driver. So I definitely appreciate that comment. And again, Melissa, thank you so much. I really appreciate your presentation today. I appreciate everybody coming out here in a snowy day, the webinar. Well, I guess not so much snowy now per se as everything's passed, but trying to dig out from all of it. So again, thank you so much. And again, next month we'll have Shelley Kelly, the Sand Hills Task Force Director, as our speaker at the end of the month. So we will conclude the presentation today, and that recording will be uploaded shortly on our UNL Extension YouTube channel, as well as the SNR website. So again, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.
We'll see you.